Today, we are taking up a very important topic. We are going to go into understanding of what is the nature of terrorism. In the modern globalized society, terrorism is one of the greatest mankind's challenges. It's a man-made challenge. That is why it is important to understand what is the nature of terrorism. When we talk about terrorism, जिसके हिंदी में जिसको आप आतंकवाद, उग्रवाद भी कहते हैं, the origin in traditional and in general form goes back to the French Revolution of 1789. We do not want to say that the French Revolution was terrorist act per se, or it was based on the ideas of terrorism. But because the zeal and philosophy behind French Revolution was based on the idea of completely eliminating the existing regime, that is kingship. That is why there was something called reign of terror. यानी कि वो आइडियाज, वो बातें जो रिपब्लिकन आइडियाज के बीच में आएंगी, जो किसी भी तरह से आगे बढ़ने वाले जो विचार हैं, that means the leaders who are propagating ideas of fraternity, equality and also a form of democracy, if they will be stopped by another group, then there will be bloodbath. Nothing less than that. That is why we can say that in the modern times, when you're going to fight for your ideas, when you're going to fight for your rights, maybe in a violent manner, then they will be termed as an act of terror in the eyes of other nation. यानी एक के लिए जो फ्रीडम फाइटिंग हो सकती है, दूसरे के लिए वही एक्टिविटी टेररिस्ट की हो सकती है. In general, when we say overthrowing of government, then terrorism comes into picture. It is a tool. Definitely it's a tool. It's a tool to achieve certain ends. कुछ इरादे, कुछ आइडियोलॉजी, कुछ बातों को पूरा करने का तरीका. मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंटली इसमें स्टेट भी हो सकता है, एंड देन सेकेंडली नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. प्लीज रिमेंबर दिस टर्म, नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स. लेकिन वो कोई एक्टिंग नहीं करते हैं, जान लेते हैं. प्रशासन को छोड़कर कोई भी ऐसी गतिविधि जो कि राष्ट्र के हित में नहीं है और वो उसकी सत्ता संप्रभुता को किसी भी प्रकार से उखाड़ने का दावा करती है, तो वो नॉन स्टेट एक्टर का पार्ट होगी. चाहे फिर वो प्रॉक्सी वॉर हो, यानी किसी और के नाम की लड़ाई, चाहे फिर वो इंसर्जेंसी हो, चाहे फिर वो किसी भी तरह का कोई भी वायलेंट एक्ट हो जो कि सत्ता को निशाना बनाता है, पब्लिक में एक तरीके का खौफनाक संशय, संदेह पैदा करता है. All such activities which creates a sense of fear, disbelief and a sense of loss against the government will be termed as an act of terror. Now, होता क्या है? कॉस्ट की बात करें, क्योंकि हम नेचर की चर्चा कर रहे हैं, वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द नेचर ऑफ टेररिज्म, then definitely there is loss of human lives, there is loss of property, it can destabilize the governments and obviously it can undermine the socio-economic development of a country or a region. आसान है कहना. Pakistan, if we take an example, which is hotbed of terrorism, which is nursery of terrorism, which is madrasa bred, or you can say a kind of school-based terrorist ideas are there. In Pakistan, we are not talking about madrasas as such. They are also hub of education since medieval times. So, the nature for Pakistan is to destabilize India and also to make sure that we are not at peace ourselves. But an inherent cost will be paid by Pakistan also. That will be also part of the nature of terrorism. Pakistan cannot actively and directly attack India. That is why it will infiltrate it will promote, it will encourage any such activities, whether it is through counterfeit currency, whether it is through smuggling, whether it is through human trafficking, whether it is through encouraging India's anti-interests. ये सब आपके सारे के सारे activities, they will be coming as a part of terrorism. Now there is a problem in defining terrorism because, as I told you, ideology यानी विचारधारा क्या है? It is a political concept. For example, if a certain region demands freedom from a nation, then it will be an act of terror. Any kind of secessionist activity. For example, let's take example of Catalonia. Catalonia wants to have independence from Spain. तो अगर वो किसी टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटी या किसी तरह की वायलेंट एक्टिविटी दे प्रमोट, वुड यू से दैट इट इज एन एक्ट ऑफ टेरर? टेक एन एग्जांपल ऑफ कुर्दिश पीपल. They are displaced. They want to have their own homeland. Turkey, Iraq border, and certain other areas, they are always under tension because of this. Take one more example when Israel attacks or Israel sends missiles into Palestine territory, or it is fighting against Hezbollah. Now Hezbollah, which is sponsored by Iran, it is seen as a terrorist organization by Israel and its allies, whereas for Iran it will be, you can say, seen as an army fighting for its own self-realization, fighting for its own self-rights. So what we are going to say is that any idea is not going to be absolute here in case of terrorism. It is going to be depending upon the context which we are talking. But under no circumstances, when North Korea says that it will launch a missile into Japan or in South Korea, or it will create a missile which will be sent across to the US, it will be seen as an act of terror. So we have to see the layers behind every justification, because without peace, nothing can be achieved. So there are many self-defense movements, there are many other kind of activities. For example, Ulfa in India, in Assam, which is also a terrorist organization. That is why India always says dialogue first, everything later. So there is a definition given by United States Department of Defense, which says that the unlawful use or threatened use of force, यानी अगर वो lawful है जो कि state करेगा और threaten नहीं करेगा, and then if there is use of violence for self defense or for protection of property or human life and values, then it will not be seen as an act of terrorism. But if the same thing is being done in order to create a kind of a fear psychosis in order to achieve political, religious or any other kind of agenda, then it will be an act of terrorism. That is why with time legal rights and also activities have been defined. So India is having, for example, UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. If you look into it, you will find that how it is shaped by the regime or by the government, because then only you can understand the context, and then you will be able to appreciate how it is being used for protection of national interests. So हमने क्या पाया? There are terrorist groups, there are insurgent organizations which are actually in the domestic zone. Then you have state and most importantly criminal organizations. They all are an important network of terror. That means Tana Bana. ISIS, in another example, if we say about criminal organizations, I've already given you an example. For example, Ulfa was seen as an insurgent organization, or in case of Nagaland, Nationalist Socialist Council, which if it is picking up arms and fighting against the Indian forces, Indian armed forces, then it will be seen as an act of insurgency and terrorism. There are terrorist groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed. If we see on the global level, you have many groups, for example, Al-Shabaab, or even in case of Africa, you have Boko Haram is another very, very prominent example. You have criminal organizations which are a syndicate. For India, Dawood Ibrahim or D Company is the most prominent name. So the key feature is that टेररिस्ट एक्ट विल बी एम्ड एज नॉन कॉम्पोनेंट्स, यानी कि नॉन कॉम्पोनेंट्स यानी कि आम आदमी की तरफ उनका इशारा होगा. दे विल ट्राई टू क्रिएट फियर साइकोसिस अमंग देम. दे विल बी एबल, दे वांट टू यूज एनी काइंड ऑफ फोर्सेस, एनी काइंड ऑफ आइडियाज इन ऑर्डर टू create a situation by which a legitimate, by which a democratic, by which a I should say a duly elected government is threatened. And that is why it is a premeditated politically motivated violence. यानी कि पहले से ही तैयार हैं, वो जानते हैं कि क्या चाहते हैं. That is why it becomes very important to handle such activities. Defense expert believes that it should be dealt as a war. इसीलिए India have been taking up this issue at the United Nations Security Council and also at other forums since decades, because it is the one which has suffered worst in both J&K and in the rest part of India, mostly because of Pakistan and its allies. That is why it is very important not only to define terror but also to condemn it and also to not support any kind of activity, or the countries, they must be shunned out, they must be singled out which are promoting terrorist activities. That is why terror groups, they will try to do things for publicity, they will use social media, they will try to create a psychological effect, they will obviously target critical infrastructure. For example, in case of India, in Chhattisgarh, there is a great development now these days, because government of India have been able to contain left-wing extremism, LWE, up to a large extent. But their goal, or the goal of Maoists over there, their goal is that in any case, जो critical infrastructure है, चाहे वो road network हो, चाहे वो telecom network हो, it must not be functional or sustaining. चाहे फिर वो public services हैं, because it will be completely eliminating their influence, which is their primary goal. So terrorism have other kind of points also, as I told you, that propagandist action by non-state actors, proxy war. Direct victims are not the ultimate target, but they are serving as a message, and role of mass media and publicity. And YouTube is one of the areas, and then you have public messaging platforms or social media platforms like Telegram, WhatsApp, and so on. Facebook also have been one of the greatest means for propagating the same. It is mostly part of the organized crime, and the purpose, as I told you, it is revenge or the collective punishment, revolution, national liberation, promotion of ideological, social, national or religious causes. हर ग्रुप सोचता है, हर इंडिविजुअल सोचता है कि मेरे साथ गलत हुआ है, और उस गलत को सही करने के लिए I have to take steps, I have to take action, and it will be violent in nature. Then when such kind of tendencies are there, for example, we use a term called Islamic Terror. Now this is a very, very contested term. क्या किसी भी टेररिज्म या किसी भी टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटी का मजहब से कुछ लेना देना हो सकता है? This is a point of ponder and point to understand. Any kind of indoctrination, any kind of radicalization will lead to ultimately chaos. For example, there have been lone wolf attacks, जिसे हम कहते हैं अकेले आप गाड़ी ले जाते हैं, आप चढ़ा देते हैं, आप अचानक से गन लेकर शुरू हो जाते हैं. Such activities have been there in Europe at times, and in Bangladesh. If you see France, then it has suffered in the recent past because of such activities, and there have been a terrorist attack in Sri Lanka also in the recent past, when there were attacks in very important critical areas, including some important churches. India condemned it badly. Whether it is France, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is Germany, India have always stood with right forces. So किसी भी तरह का आइडियोलॉजिकल, सोशल या कोई भी रिलीजियस एजेंडा भी इंडिया डू नॉट सपोर्ट. दैट इज वाई नेचर जो है वो बहुत ही विविड है, लेकिन किसी भी तरह के नेचर को हम सपोर्ट नहीं कर सकते. वी हैव टू फाइंड वेज, वी हैव टू फाइंड हाउ इट कैन बी prevented by social, by economical, by political, and by religious harmony rather than increasing it. So, as we just said, I have tried to help you in understanding the nature of terrorism by giving you basic and critical inputs. In our coming interactions, I am going to put more emphasis upon basic ideas. You keep on reading newspaper, keep on understanding ideas, keep on bringing out the key elements, and then try to write something for the examination purpose. Because gossip or even any kind of uh, mindless reading probably is not going to help you both in the short run and in the long run. Wishing you all the best for your studies and cracking exam. Thank you very much.